Okay, there's nothing funny today, folks. This needs to be done. This needs to be done now.
As we continue to work the logistics of evacuation, we're in constant contact with the Taliban, working to ensure civilians have safe passage to the airport. We are particularly focused on our engagements on making sure every American who wants to leave can get to the airport. Where we have been seeing challenges with Americans, for Americans, we have thus far been able to resolve them.
This remains very much a disaster. And one of the contributing factors here is when you listen to the president, he is saying things that simply do not comport with the reality that we are seeing with our own eyes. When he says that every American can get to that airport, there hasn't been an issue with that. That doesn't comport with the reality that you heard Ian describe. It also doesn't comport with the reality that the State Department has been issuing in guidance that we have seen from the State Department to Americans in Afghanistan, encouraging people to make the trip to the airport to be evacuated. But even in the State Department's guidance, the United States government cannot ensure safe passage to the Hamid Karzai International Airport. The State Department is telling Americans that they cannot guarantee their safe passage to the airport. So how can the president say that there isn't an issue getting Americans safely to the airport?
This is an emergency now. It's nothing to do with process. They're just trying to save lives. Tens of thousands are trying to get through. At the front, they're being crushed. Everyone working flat out, trying to stem the tide of an unfolding disaster.
The problem now is not trying to control the crowds per se, it's the fact that at the front people are just getting crushed and they can't just leave them to get crushed and the heat is terrible and there's lots of children. So they're having to have a sort of secondary barrier where people who may have never get in properly are at least safe for the time being. It just seems to go from bad to worse here.
People are being killed in Afghanistan right now. He says no one is being killed.
Still a lot of pandemonium outside the airport.
Well, there is, but look, but no one's being killed right now. God forgive me if I'm wrong about that, but no one's being killed right now.
Then what we feared, the inevitable. Is this a stabilized withdrawal from Afghanistan? It looks like death to me.
We know a dozen people have been killed just around the airport. That is a lie. Why is he so cold and callous and stubborn? I found the answer today, I think. It was reported by Richard Holbrooke. It was in Richard Holbrooke's diary. He was the special envoy to Afghanistan and to Pakistan in the Obama administration. The Atlantic reported a revelation from his diary about Joe Biden. This was back in 2010. According to Holbrooke's diary, when he was asked about American obligations to Afghans like the girls in the Kabul school, Biden replied with a history lesson saying this: F that. We don't have to worry about that. We did it in Vietnam. Nixon and Kissinger got away with it. This is from a credible person in the Obama administration. That was 2010, and now these cold, callous remarks we hear in 2021. It's unacceptable.
I just want to follow up on something you said a moment ago. You said that there's no circumstances where American citizens cannot get to the airport. That doesn't really square with the images we're seeing around the airport, with the reporting on the ground from our colleagues who are describing chaos and violence.
The panic, the lack of clear information, the rumor mill is in overdrive. There's hysteria. You have Taliban fighters with whips, with guns. You have U.S. and U.K. soldiers who are not allowing people in. You have mixed messaging coming through about what kind of paperwork you need and how you can get on a flight and where you can go. I mean, it is just an absolute mess. And we heard President Biden say yesterday in his comments to ABC News that this is not a failure. And I think a lot of people outside that airport, particularly those taking the kinds of extreme actions we're just talking about, would like to know, if this isn't failure, what does failure look like exactly?
From our own Stephanie Ramos, who was there at the White House, she asked about Americans and Afghans who are in Kabul and beyond, who are trying to get to that airport. But as you have reported for many nights on World News Tonight, the Taliban controls the checkpoint, the Taliban and convoys around that country. How do you get those families to the airport? The president said he has no intelligence that Americans have been unable to get there. The question, obviously, does that square with reporting on the ground?
I mean, just totally not. I mean, the reaction was pretty much one of, it was breathtaking. No indication Americans can't get to the airport. I mean, last night on World News, we had American citizens who had exactly that experience. They tried to get to the airport. They had waived their American passports. The president talked about all they had to do was present their passports and they'd be allowed through. They were beaten by the Taliban with the rubber fan belt from a vehicle. Multiple examples of Americans and Afghans, SIV applicants, who have now tried repeatedly. It just seems the reality and the rhetoric are miles apart. I'm not quite sure what advice the president's receiving, but the truth on the ground is that these people who are in fear of their lives can't get through.
And then the other thing, David, when the president said there have been no question from our allies, that our allies have been united on this. That's not exactly correct either. I mean, we saw in the last few days the British defense minister literally in tears, breaking back tears, talking about how the West looks weak in all of this and the fear of terrorism going forward.
We've also seen that the White House's readouts of the call with Macron left out that Macron told Biden he had a moral responsibility to evacuate Afghan allies, a plea that was in the French readout of the call, The Guardian reports. And the UK Parliament holds Joe Biden in contempt, saying that the peers unite to condemn dishonor of US President's withdrawal and his criticism of Afghan troops left behind to face the Taliban.
And so it is with great sadness that I now criticize one of them. Because I was never prouder than when I was decorated by the 82nd Airborne after the capture of Musakala. It was a huge privilege to be recognized by such an extraordinary unit in combat. To see their commander-in-chief call into question the courage of men I fought with, to claim that they ran. It's shameful. Those who have never fought for the colors they fly should be careful about criticizing those who have.
And at least they're taking action to mobilize their own military to get their own people out of there.
And the idea that the French and the British are going outside the wire, bringing people in, and the US isn't, that's going to be a huge affront to them.
The British send their paratroopers bravely into Kabul to save UK citizens while Biden does nothing.
Well, look, those scenes of chaos outside of the airport happening once again today, a major concern not only to American forces, but a variety of other countries who have troops on the ground trying to evacuate as many Afghan civilians as possible. We do know the U.S. State Department putting out an alert for American citizens in Afghanistan, saying today because of potential security threats outside of the gates, they were actually asking Americans to stay put until they received further information. Now, we do know, according to reports, there are concerns that ISIS affiliates inside Afghanistan could target Americans. That could be the potential security threat referenced in this memo that went out from the U.S. State Department. But those images of chaos once again playing out as Taliban fighters reportedly push back people who are trying to enter. Once again, the words that we are hearing from officials in Washington not matching up to what is actually happening on the ground in Kabul. Because when it comes down to it, the major concern for American forces on the ground is that they will be targeted as these evacuation efforts continue.
Which is confirmed by NBC, citing two defense officials, saying that the U.S. is tracking specific threats from ISIS against Kabul's airport and against Americans and others trying to leave Afghanistan.
The Taliban clearly are not terribly afraid of President Biden right now. He's more afraid of them attacking him. And at the moment, they are reliant entirely, the U.S. is reliant entirely on Taliban goodwill for allowing people to get inside that airport. It is frankly baffling right now.
All the while, the vice president visits Singapore and Vietnam, and you don't know whether you're coming or going, with another trip to your comfy bed in Delaware being canceled yet again. And after all of this, the Pentagon won't even call the Taliban their enemy.
Does the U.S. military consider the Taliban an enemy?
We're our focus right now. The thing we're working against right now is time and space, and we want to get as many people out of Kabul as we can in as little amount of time as we can.
And the Taliban takes over a U.S. war chest given to Afghan military, according to Axios, complete with U.S.-made Humvees, planes, helicopters, night vision goggles, and drones. Going on to say U.S. officials aren't just worried about the Taliban using the weapons against civilians, they're also concerned the equipment could be seized by ISIS or handed over to China or Russia. And here you are considering launching airstrikes against the equipment the U.S. troops left behind? Stop considering it. Stop talking about getting our people home. Do something about it. Do it. Act.
The problem is, Marcus, the commanders Joe Biden's not calling on them to go in there and get these people. He hasn't given our military those orders, and it's hard to take a deep breath when you know that women and men are over there so terrified that they're not coming home.
They are. They're terrified. Like I said, I've been there, and I was trained, and I was scared. And if they're in a, you need to go get them. You need to go get our people. That's what I'll say.
We're done with the talk. We're done. Just get it done.